Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Flipgrid Live Event. I'm Anne from Team Flipgrid, and today we are joined by Janice, an Associate Curator of Egyptian Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Before we get started, let me just say this. If you don't know what Flipgrid is, we are a free video communication platform from Microsoft. And we are on a mission to empower every person on the planet to share their voice and respect the diverse voices of others. And that's why we're so excited about today's live event. Folks, did you know that ancient Egyptians used artwork to tell us what they believed about the afterlife? Janice is joining us from the halls at the Met Museum in New York and will tell us all about it. Hello, Janice. Welcome. We're so excited to learn from you today.
Hi.
Welcome.
So, welcome everyone to Gallery 126 at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is our coffin gallery, and we have about 25 coffins in here. Today, I'm going to focus on the ones right here that you see on your screen with the white one and the two others next to them. These coffins were made for a temple musician, a singer for the god Amun-Re named Henetawi. So Henetawi lived about 3,000 years ago in a city called Waset, and you'll hear it nowadays called Thebes or Luxor, but its ancient name was Waset, and it was a city that was sacred to the god Amun-Re, who was the king of the gods. So Henetawi was a priestess in the cult of the god Amun-Re, king of the gods. So you see here her coffins, and what you actually have here is a nest of coffins. You have a big outer coffin, and then a slightly smaller inner coffin, and then here is what we call a mummy board. This is just a lid. There's no bottom to it. So Henetawi would have been buried inside these coffins, and these coffins represent Henetawi herself. So maybe we'll look at the center coffin here, the inner coffin, and you can see, especially from the waist up, you see that she's represented as a beautiful woman, and she has a beautiful face, and she's dressed in her finery. She's got jewelry. You can see she has big earrings, and she has bracelets. And if you zoom in, you can see that she has rings on all of her fingers, and she also has fancy jewelry on her hair. And then if we look up at the top of her head, she's wearing a sort of a crown that's made out of flowers, and the big flower in the middle is a lotus blossom. And this was a symbol of rebirth, because a lot of what's happening here in these coffins is made to help her be reborn after she dies, because that's what ancient Egyptians wanted to do after they died. They wanted to be reborn. We're also going to look at another image of Henetawi. So again, you can just see she's very beautiful. You can see here another image of Henetawi, and here she is shown as a musician. She's actually, and Rick, if you can zoom in just a little bit more, I'm going to try to point, which is not so easy. Here we go. Okay, so there you can see she's dressed in this flowing gown, and she's got, again, a crown on her face, and she's holding something in her hand that's called a sistrum. And this is kind of a sacred rattle. It was on a post, and then you had little jingly things on top. And when she shook it, it would make a kind of a rustling sound, and that would call the god or the goddess into the temple to be worshipped. So there you see Henetawi doing her job as a temple musician. You can also see that she's idealized. This is not what she really looked like, but it's what a beautiful ancient Egyptian woman would have looked like, dressed in the clothes that she would wear to the temple or to a festival. And this also shows her after her rebirth as one of the blessed dead. So now I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the discovery of these coffins. So These were found by archaeologists from this museum, led by a man named Herbert Winlock, and they were found on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. And they were found in a shaft tomb and then in a chamber at the bottom of the shaft tomb, hidden, cut into the bedrock of the desert, and then hidden so nobody could find them, so that she would be safe forever and ever. It was also important that she was buried on the west bank. Most ancient Egyptian cemeteries were on the west bank of the Nile River, because this was the land of the setting sun. When the sun traveled through the sky, it would then set in the west, and that would be the sun dying, and then travel through the netherworld to be reborn over the eastern horizon at dawn. And so when people died in ancient Egypt, one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to join with the sun god so that they could travel through. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about Henetawi's mummy. She was actually not mummified. She was not embalmed. So, which means that to make a proper mummy, you would dry out the body and you would remove some of the internal organs to keep the body from decaying. This was not done for Henetawi, but she was wrapped in a lot of linen cloth, lots and lots of linen cloth. And if we come over here, we can see, hopefully you can see a little bit here on this, this pedestal here, we have a couple of pieces of the linen cloth, which, by the way, included some old shirts, because they used old cloth that was lying around a lot of the time. And then next to the cloth, you can see, and they're just little pieces of cloth, but next to this is also jewelry that her family put on her to bury her. And it's interesting because it's made out of, I don't know if you can see it there, I'm trying to point here. You can see that there were necklaces and bracelets. And she was very small, by the way. She was only about 5 feet tall, 153 centimeters tall. But she had on jewelry that was made of knotted string. And the number of knots is also interesting because there's some 12 and some 24, which is how many hours there were in the Egyptian day. There were 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night. So it's very likely that this jewelry also helped associate her, bring her together with the sun god. And the knotted strings have little charms and things on them to protect her. Another interesting thing here is the very small things. There are rings, and on the rings are scarab beetles, which is a symbol of the rising sun, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the scarabs here were already about 500 years old when Henetawi lived. So maybe they were some kind of heirlooms, or maybe they found them, but they were antiques when Henetawi lived. So she was buried with some antiques, which I think is really neat. Okay, so a couple of other things about Henetawi that we know from her mummy. Again, she was about 5 feet tall. She was very young when she died. She was in her early 20s. She had short, dark hair. So what you see on the coffins are wigs, and the ancient Egyptians often wore wigs. And there's actually one behind me that belonged to a different priestess. She also had very good teeth, which was unusual for ancient Egyptians because sand got in their food, and often they had worn down teeth. But that's what we know about Henetawi. The excavator also tried to figure out what happened when they buried her, and they found the coffins lying horizontally, not standing up like we see them now. They would have been stood up for certain rituals, but then she was buried lying down. And so what Herbert Winlock, the excavator, figured out was that they put the two bases, the outer coffin and the inner coffin base, down, and put the inner coffin base inside, then lowered the mummy down using cloth as ropes, lowered her into her coffin, and then put the mummy board on top, this red mummy board here. And then they put the inner lid on top, but it didn't fit. So they hadn't planned carefully or they wrapped her in too much linen, and they had to chop off the foot here. Can you see down at the bottom here that the foot of the mummy board is damaged? So Herbert Winlock and his team actually found the rest of the foot in the chamber, and that's how they figured out what happened. Anyway, so then they put the inner lid on and the outer lid on, and then they fastened them down, and then they left her there for eternity, which was a long time. It was 3,000 years until our museum found her and brought her to New York. So I want to say a quick word about coffins versus mummies, because a lot of times people look at coffins and they call them mummies. The mummy was actually the wrapped body, and these are coffins according to Egyptologists. But I want to say that the ancient Egyptians would not have been upset about this confusion, because to them, the coffins were meant to represent the dead person and to act as a substitute body if something happened to the body. So they did have different words for different coffins and things, but basically it's okay if you get them mixed up. But just for reference, these are coffins and the mummy is the wrapped body for us. But the advantage, of course, to a coffin is that you can paint it. So these are made out of wood, and then they're plastered and painted with texts. And if you look closely, you can see that they're hieroglyphs in bands here. And actually, this is interesting. On this one, we can also just reinforce the coffin is mummy, because in fact, the bottom part of this coffin is made to look like a mummy, because you'd wrap all the linen and then you'd put narrower strips around the mummy to keep all the wrappings together. And you can see that these bands are meant to look like that, but they're also a great place to put inscriptions. So if you look here, actually I'm just pointing to it, okay. These are spells that were spoken by the gods and goddesses to protect Henetawi. And so now I'm going to talk more about the decoration and what it means, because this is one of the ways that we can find out how the ancient Egyptians thought and what they believed about what happened after they died. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to take a step back and talk about some gods and goddesses. And I'm going to talk about the sky goddess Nut. And I'm going to talk about the god of the dead, Osiris. And I'm going to talk about his sisters, Isis and Nephthys, who you're going to see on the feet here. And I'm going to talk about the sun god, Re. So, and then I have to take yet another step back, and I'm going to tell you very quickly a version of the ancient Egyptian creation myth, because we need to know where these gods and goddesses came from. And it's also interesting because in the ancient Egyptian view of the world, at the very beginning, before time, the universe was darkness and water, and everything was all one thing. It was just all together, and nothing was separate or different. And then a mound of earth appeared in the endless, limitless water, and the creator God stood on this mound and brought the universe into being and started time. And in the version that I'm telling you here, the creator God's name was Atum, and he's a version of the sun god. So he stands there and he separates the land from the water and the earth from the sky and the day from the night, and creates the universe by making things different, by separating all these things. So he had two children, Shu, the god of the air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. And because there was no one else around, Shu and Tefnut got married, and they had two children, Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. And they got married and had 4 children, and now we get to see some people on the coffin, although I will say, since we're focused in on, you can see the winged goddess there, that's Nut, and we'll come back to her in a second. But they had Osiris, who is here, and he's very important in terms of funerary and everything. So you can see here, he's standing right there. So Osiris, Isis, his wife, Nephthys, their sister, and the younger brother's name was Seth. And Isis and Osiris were married and they ruled over Egypt. They ruled on earth as king and queen of Egypt. Everything was peaceful, everything was wonderful, except Seth, the younger brother, was jealous and he wanted to be king of Egypt, so he killed his brother Osiris. And he cut his body up into 14 pieces and scattered them all over Egypt. And it was up to Isis and Nephthys, who are down here on the bottom of the coffin here. You'll often find them down here, and they're kind of upside down. This is Nephthys on the far side, and you can't really see Isis, but she looks the same, but they have different names on their heads. That's how you know who they are. So Isis and Nephthys went around and gathered all the pieces of Osiris together and wrapped them up. And there you have the first mummy. So Osiris himself is thought of as the first mummy. And when people died, and Rick, you can zoom back out. When an ancient Egyptian died, they wanted to become like Osiris. So what happened to Osiris after he died and was mummified? He was brought back to life, but he couldn't stay on earth. He had to descend to the netherworld under the earth, and there he ruled over the dead. He became the principal god of the dead, and he stayed in the netherworld and was the main god of the dead, the king of the dead. So an ancient Egyptian wanted to become like Osiris, and to do that they had to be mummified and wrapped in linen. So Henetawi, again, she wasn't properly mummified, but she was certainly wrapped in linen, and she would have been considered a mummy. And what we see on the coffin is we see these actually, we have 4 of them. We have these black jackals, 2 up here and 2 down at the bottom. And they represent the god Anubis, who was the god of embalming. And he was in charge of making sure that the mummification went well. And then he was assisted by these guys right here, the 4 sons of Horus, they're called. Let's see if I can point them out. And you can see that they have different heads. We have Hapi, and they protected the inner organs that were mummified separately and also represented them. And so we have Hapi with a baboon head, and Duamutef with a jackal head, and we have Quebec Senuef with a falcon head. Pointing is hard. And Imseti with a human head. So they helped with the mummification and protection. And then most important, again, down on the feet, we have Isis and Nephthys, the sisters, the magicians, the great ones who transformed the deceased into an Osiris that then could be buried and go live forever in the netherworld. But at the same time, the deceased wanted to be with the sun god. So both things happened at the same time. So quick review of what the sun does. So the sun traveled through the day sky in a boat as the god Re-Herakti, like a falcon, in the form of a falcon. And you can see here on the chest of the outer coffin, you can see falcons, you can see them in various places. And then at night, the sun would die and descend over the western horizon and then travel through the netherworld, fighting off the enemies of the Egyptian universe, including a very big snake. And in the middle of the night, in the deepest part of the netherworld, the sun god would join with Osiris, because they were kind of 2 aspects of the same idea. And that would give Osiris the ability to live forever in the netherworld, and it would give the sun god the energy to continue traveling, fighting off his enemies, and be born at dawn in the form of a scarab beetle. And so you see the scarab beetle all over the place. That's the sun god being reborn. So this was how the deceased was able to live forever, like Osiris in the netherworld, and like Re being born and dying each day. So that is Henetawi. This is what Henetawi would have believed, as we see from her coffins. We are so, so privileged to have her here in our galleries so that we can learn from her and appreciate her beauty. And thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. And I'm now going to hand things back over to Anne.
Janice, this has been fascinating to hear you describe not only how artwork is used in these coffins, but the history and of Henetawi and learning about the gods like Osiris. Thank you so much for sharing this information. And Janice, we're getting a lot of questions coming in the chat, and we're going to ask you those in just a moment. But before we do, we would love to take a selfie with you. And so right now, folks who are listening in, it's time for you to get set up. If you want to move in front of your screen, move in your classroom, or wherever it is you're watching, we would love to see the photos that you share with us on social. So get set up, and when you do share them, be sure to tag us at Flipgrid, and please be sure to tag at MetMuseum too. All right, Janice, get your smile ready, folks. It's selfie time. We know lots of you are tuning in all around the world, so smile and get those pictures. Now is a great time. Keep smiling, folks. Awesome. What an incredible picture. What an incredible picture. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. That was so awesome. And folks, please be sure to share these on social and tag us using at MetMuseum and at Flipgrid. And now, Janice, it's time to get to some of those questions. We have a question coming in from a classroom in Washington asking, does everybody get mummified?
That's such a good question. And the answer is probably no. Well, as you see, Henetawi was not exactly mummified herself. Henetawi was very wealthy. She was part of the family that was really ruling the south of Egypt at this time. She was probably not very high up in the family, but most of what we recover from ancient Egypt is from the top level of society. We don't know about absolutely everybody. Some people might have been mummified more naturally because the desert was a place where you could be desiccated. As time went on, it seems like more and more people would have been mummified. So ideally, I would say yes. In reality, probably not. I hope that answers as well as we can.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Thank you for explaining it. Now, our friends in Mrs. Pavanka's third grade class are asking, how long does it typically take to make these coffin nests?
So that's a difficult question to answer because it depends. We have some, and it depends how nicely it's done. Some of the coffins we see are not nearly as beautiful as this one. Some are even more beautiful because, for example, her face could have been gilded and her hands, and we have coffins, I don't know if you can see the ones over here that are now missing their faces because they were gold and people stole them. So how long it would take to make them would depend on how fancy it was. In some cases, it's clear that people have taken somebody else's coffin and reused it for their own. So that would obviously take a lot less time because you already had the coffin. Probably, so I don't want to really guess because I don't think it would be fair, and I think it depends a lot. And you also have the making of the coffin itself and decorating it, which are two separate issues. So I don't know that I can give you a great answer to that. It would depend on how nicely it was done to a large extent.
I think that's a great answer because you helped us with really great descriptions that it is different. And a lot of factors contribute to the length of that. So thank you for that description. Now, we are getting a lot of questions about mummies, and this is great because today's topic of the day is called Making Mummies. And before we show everybody how to find that, Janice, can you help us understand the role that priests would play in preparing a body for the afterlife?
Sure. To me, the role of, I'm probably going to answer a slightly different question because there's, of course, the role of the embalmers, the people that were actually making the mummy, who would have been supervised by priests. And there would have been actually a priest who represented Anubis. We have a lot of images, and we even have some masks, not at the Met, but in other museums, where you have a mask, a jackal mask. So we know that there were human beings, men, who would oversee the embalming and the rituals associated with it, wearing these masks with, holes in the neck for these big jackal heads. They're very cool. So there would definitely have been priests involved in the embalming process, reciting spells, possibly reading from something called the Book of the Dead, which is a collection of spells that were designed to help the deceased. There would have been priests, and in fact, ideally, it was a member of the family, the oldest son, who would perform the rites at the burial during the funeral, and they would do something called the opening of the mouth, where they would set up the coffins and the mummy and touch the eyes and the nose and the mouth to restore the senses. So that's something priests would do. Also, though, priests were very important in the temple priests because they were the ones that helped figure out what the Egyptian universe was like and what they thought happened after death. And they were the ones that, for example, some of the spells, some of the texts on Henetawi's coffins go all the way back to the time of the pyramids, which is like 1,500 years before Henetawi lived. So they were scholars. They were kind of like the Albert Einsteins and Neil deGrasse Tysons of ancient Egypt that were trying to understand how the universe worked. So
Oh
I hope
my gosh, this
that
is,
helps.
yeah. It has been fascinating to hear you describe this. I know we are all learning so much. Thank you, Janice. Now, educators and parents, let me show you how easy it is to find today's topic of the day. This is as easy as opening your browser and typing in aka.ms/MakeMummies. And this will take you directly to today's Flipgrid topic of the day called Making Mummies. You'll see the image and a prompt that your learners can use to reflect and respond to. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice a small blue button that says Add Topic. And this is what your learners will see as they begin to reflect and respond to today's topic using all of the fun creative effects inside the Flipgrid camera. Remember, you can use this topic immediately following today's live event as a follow-up. And we'll post the link in the chat for you to just copy and paste. And now it's time to get back to a few more questions with Janice. Janice, Mrs. Facella's class is asking, how did they get the paints to paint the coffins?
Right. So they used minerals. They ground up various minerals that they found mainly in the desert, or in black, they used carbon, and they mixed it with oils of various sorts to make a paint. And it's wonderful. We have a conservator here named Anna Serrata, who's been doing experimental archaeology with making paint and making brushes. And if you go on the Met Museum website and go to Met Kids, you can actually find a little thing that she's made about how the ancient Egyptians painted. And so I can also direct you to that for more information. But basically grinding up minerals and mixing it with some kind of binder to keep it together.
Fascinating. Now, this is an interesting question from Ms. Stebor's class, wondering what do you think the ancient Egyptians would think about the coffins on display in museums?
Boy, that's a very interesting question that we at the museum ask ourselves all the time. And we really, because for the ancient Egyptians, what they wanted was to be in their tombs safe for eternity. But that didn't happen. It didn't even happen during ancient times. As you can remember the faces that were taken off these coffins. Tombs were robbed in ancient times by tomb robbers who just took the things and used them again. Again, many of the coffins in here were reused, maybe within the same family. So the ideal was that your coffin and your mummy would stay in your tomb forever and ever, but the reality was very different. To me, being able to have these coffins here in the museum allows us to know Henetawi a little bit. Another thing the ancient Egyptians wanted was for their name to live forever, to be spoken forever. And because she's here and because we discovered her, we can say her name and we can learn about her and we can learn from her and we can learn that she wasn't very different. Maybe she had different beliefs about how the world worked, but she was a person just like we are.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that explanation. What a beautiful way to honor these individuals and their continuing journey in the afterlife. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Con Kids EEVP, this is an awesome group of folks asking, can the coffins be made in materials other than wood?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they can. The other, some coffins are made out of pottery or clay, and some coffins, and we have several in the museum that are made out of what's called cartonnage, which is kind of paper mache. It was made using layers of either linen or papyrus and a kind of a paste, plaster paste, and layers to make a kind of a shell. And what they would do was they would build this around a mud core, the shape of a person. Then they would take out the core and they would put the person in and they would sew them up inside. So, and that's called cartonnage. So that's another thing. And stone. Also, coffins could be made of stone. Sometimes stone coffins are called sarcophagi. So a sarcophagus is a stone coffin that can be either shaped like a human or it can be like a big rectangular box, which you can also do with wood.
Oh my gosh, I am learning so much, and I know everybody listening in is as well. Now, our friends over at Eaton School in Casa 3 are asking, why do all the coffins show that the folks have their arms crossed?
So that's what Osiris would do. I'm so glad you asked that. Rick, can we zoom back in on Osiris here? So Osiris, remember, was king of Egypt, and then he became king of the dead. And as king, what you would do is you would hold the symbols of kingship, which are the crook and the flail. Those are the symbols of kingship. So Osiris is always shown, if you go down just a little bit here, go down here, there he is, okay? So he's shown as a mummy, okay? He has on a tall crown. I like to call that the bowling pin crown, and that represents him as a king. And he has feathers that represent the way the universe is supposed to be, called Ma'at. But to get back to your question, you gave me a chance to say more things, thank you. He's holding the symbols of kingship, the crook and the flail, crossed on his chest, because that's what kings did. So basically, that's what, when a coffin or a mummy, mummies often had, at this period, their hands down by their sides, which Henetawi did. But here she's shown with her hands crossed, which associates her with Osiris.
Oh my goodness, Janice, thank you. And folks, those are incredible questions. We do want to ask Janice if you have any final thoughts for the folks who are watching.
I just hope that you enjoyed this and that if you get a chance, you can come and visit us here in New York and meet Henetawi in person. But if you can't, please come to metmuseum.org and you can explore more about Henetawi and the other people that we have here in the museum and the wonderful art that we love to share with you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Today has been so special getting to learn from you, learn more about ancient Egyptian civilizations and the incredible art that you are sharing throughout all of those symbols, the artwork on these coffins. It's incredible to see them up close like we have with you, Janice. Thank you so much. And folks tuning in, we have Flipgrid live events every week. And we have an incredible lineup coming soon. And we would love for you to join us for more learning. You can head to aka.ms/Flipgrid live events to register and join in. And please don't forget to check out today's topic of the day. It is live now on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Discovery Library page. Thank you, Janice, again for teaching us today. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. We want to say bye and have a great day.